welcome to another A to Z World's Foods video, brought to you by the Estevan Public Library and the Weyburn Public Library. Today we are going to be making Bretzel, or a pretzel roll, from the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, in honor of National Pretzel Day on April 26th. We're going to go get a look at our ingredients and we'll get started. Alright, so for our pretzel dough, we are going to need a 1/3 cup of warm water, a packet of dry yeast, 2 tablespoons of warm milk, 1/3 cup of brown sugar, 2 tablespoons of melted butter, 4 cups of flour, and flake salt to top. For your boiling liquid, you will need 2 quarts or 2 liters of cold water and 1.5 cup of baking soda. So we're going to start by activating our yeast. So to get started, we're going to pour our yeast into the bowl, and if you don't have packets of yeast, you can use 2.5 teaspoons of active dry yeast. So we're going to take 1/3 cup of our warm water and we're going to pour it in. And we're going to give the yeast time to bubble and form. And while we're waiting for that, I'm going to go melt our butter and heat up our milk. Alright, so now that we have our yeast in the bowl, it is starting to foam a little bit. Something else you can do is you can start your yeast in a smaller bowl. Now that that is starting to foam up, we're going to add our melted butter, our remaining warm water, and our warm milk. Now, I just warmed my milk in the microwave for about 10 seconds and it was warm enough. 1 cup of our warm water and our 1/3 cup of brown sugar, and then you're going to stir until the sugar dissolves. I'm going to use a fork. You could use a whisk. If you have a stand mixer, you can use your attachment in your stand mixer. Fortunately, because everything's warm, the sugar will melt pretty quick. So, the next step is we are going to mix in 4 cups of flour. All right. So 1. I'm going to do mine about a cup at a time, so that way we don't end up with just too much flour. You also, if you would like, you can also use your hands. I'm going to start with my spoon, and then I might switch to my hands. We'll see as it goes. So the goal is to have a soft, malleable or workable dough. And I am finding that my dough is actually pretty good, and I don't think it's going to need that 4th cup of flour. And sometimes that happens with dough, depending on what type of environment you're working in and things like that. You don't always need the full amount of flour with bread doughs. And this is probably more comparable to a bread dough. I'm going to add a little bit more because it's still a little bit sticky to the touch, but I'm not going to add the full 4th cup because you don't want to end up with a dough that's too tough or too dry, which is a benefit to using your hands, is you can kind of feel how the dough feels. If it's, really tough or really sticky and really loose, you're going to want to add more flour. Yeah, so we're just going to work it with our hands a little bit, sort of work in the rest of that flour. And like I said, you don't need to add all 3 cups if your dough doesn't need it, because like now we have pretty soft and malleable dough, so I'm gonna call that good, and we're gonna move on to our next step. So next, you're going to need a clean, lightly floured work surface. I always like to keep a cup of flour nearby, just so that way I have more flour if I need. You can also use some of the excess flour in your bowl if you have any. Doesn't hurt to keep that on hand. So the next step you're going to do is you're going to knead your dough. Now the trick is to not over knead your dough. So you're going to kind of fold it in, press it flat, and then flip it and fold it again. Press it, fold it. You're just going to kind of do that a few times until you have a nice ball beginning to form. Our instructions say to knead for about 2 minutes. You can also kind of tell by the feel of the dough as well. When it's done, you'll notice it gets smoother and smoother and probably doesn't stretch out as much. You'll start to feel it to get a little bit sticky as you work your way through the dough. As you see now, didn't take me quite 2 minutes. Probably let it sit for about 2 minutes, and then we will move on. All right, so now that we've let our dough sit for a couple minutes, we're gonna roll our dough into a log shape and try to get it to about 2 feet or 60 centimeters in length. You may need to lay out more flour or spread your flour out a little bit more, but your goal is to lengthen it to about 2 rulers in length. Another trick you can do if you're having trouble rolling is you can kind of squeeze along and elongate it that way. You just have to be careful not to end up with spots that are too thick, because you want them to be, eventually we're going to make them into even shapes. So we're going to call that good on my end because I don't want to over roll it. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to cut it into 12 equal pieces. If you have a scale, you can totally measure to make sure they're the same. Make sure they're the same weight, or you can just go by size. If you have a pastry cutter, you can use that. I'm just going to go with a butter knife, and we're going to see how that goes. So on about 12 equal pieces. If you don't get exactly 12, as long as they're equal, that's probably your concern for cooking. And then I'm just going to plot mine on this cookie sheet here, so that way I can wrap them to let them rise. Now if you notice you have any that are a little bit bigger and you want to try to add them to some of the smaller ones, you can totally do that. You can just pinch it off with your hand. This is where doing by weight is really helpful, because then you can know exactly which ones are bigger, which ones are smaller. But also, you know, if they're not perfect, that's also okay. So we're going to leave these, we're going to cover these in plastic wrap. You could probably also cover them with a dish towel if you'd like, but our instructions say plastic wrap, so I'm going to do that. Then you're going to leave them for about 10 minutes. All right, so our next step is to bring 2 quarts or 2 liters of water to a boil in a stock pot or a deep pot. I'm going to recommend that you start this while your dough is rising. Make sure you have a timer set for that. And we're going to let our water boil. And once the water is boiling, we'll add our baking soda. But for now, you're just going to let it boil as is. So we'll check back when when our pot is boiling and our dough is ready to go. All right, so it's been about 10 minutes. So we're going to lift off our plastic wrap. And we are going to knead them into desired shape. I'm just going to shape them into little balls here. Say to cover with a lightly oiled plastic wrap and let sit for an additional 30 seconds. So I'm just going to use some non-stick cooking spray and just really quickly sort of spray our plastic wrap. Then I'm going to lay it on top of our plastic wrap, and then we'll give that about 30 seconds. Then we'll move over to the stove and we will boil these guys. All right, so as you can see, our pot is boiling. So we are going to add our half cup of baking soda into our pot. Add it slowly as it'll bubble. So we're just gonna add it very slowly so we don't overboil. This is why I want to make sure you use this in a deep pot. This isn't something you can do in just any old pot. And then before we throw our little guys in, we're gonna just quickly spray some oil on our pans. Also feel free to use parchment paper or other kinds of oil. You're also going to want a slotted spoon or a pair of tongs for this next step. So we're going to take our plastic wrap off our little dough balls here, and we are going to plop them in 2 at a time for about 30 seconds. Then we're going to let them drip dry, pop them on 2 different cooking sheets. You're going to have 6 on each one, just so they give it some room to rise and some space. So let's get started. So you want to count to about 30 seconds per guy. All right. And after about 30 seconds, you let them get drip dry off, and then really carefully, you're gonna stick them on to your oiled sheet. And you're just gonna do that 6 more times. All right, so once you've done that, you're gonna take your flaky salt, your coarse salt, and you're gonna sprinkle it on top. All right, now you're gonna put them in your oven at 425. For 10 minutes. All right, so we have pulled our pretzel buns out of the oven. They have cooled. It did take them exactly 10 minutes to brown up like this and look all nice. So we're gonna give it a try. On the recipe, they recommend turning it into a sandwich bun or using like a spicy mustard or just having on their own. So we're just gonna give it a whirl. Whoa. That tastes very much like a pretzel. It's very good. I 10 out of 10 recommend you try this recipe. And if you wanted to do them, you could even probably take them down into slightly smaller. If you wanted to use them for like an appetizer, you could probably shrink the size down and make them tiny. But yeah, they're really good. I definitely recommend trying this recipe. So that is our video for A to Z World Foods. Reminder that the A to Z World Foods can be found at the Southeast Regional website under e-resources, and all you need is your library card to have access to them. I'm Anna Lawrence from the Estevan Public Library, and I hope you enjoy cooking. Bye!